Hi, my name is Verity Sloan, and the last thing my husband ever said to me before I stopped being his wife was, "I'm tired of your miserable face. Your sister knows how to make a man happy." Imagine hearing that from the man you built a home with and the sister you trusted your whole life. For years, I thought being quiet made me kind. That patience was love. But silence doesn't save you. It buries you alive. What they didn't know was that the same silence they mistook for weakness was the calm before I took everything back. So tell me, if the people closest to you betrayed you this deeply, would you still choose peace? Or would you finally choose yourself? It was just before Thanksgiving, the kind of cold that makes windows sweat and wood floors snap under your feet. I was curled up in my armchair with a worn-out throw and a lukewarm cup of chamomile tea when my phone buzzed with the familiar chime of our family group chat. Don't forget the wine for Saturday. Should we surprise Mom with a cake from Claudia's bakery? Callista, can you bring that playlist you made last year? Messages poured in, one after the other. My sister, Callista, was at the center of it, as usual, cheerfully taking the lead, suggesting desserts, posting memes that everyone reacted to with heart emojis and laugh reacts. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, ready to type something, anything. Just a simple, "I can help with," or maybe "What time should I come?" But no one asked me. No one tagged me. It wasn't just an oversight. It was the silence that had shape. And that silence weighed more than words ever could. I typed out, "Should I bring something?" and stared at it. Then I backspaced. I typed again, something even shorter. "I can drive, Mom." Still, I didn't hit send. What was the point? Maybe I missed something earlier. Maybe they had planned it all in another thread. That's what I told myself, though I knew better. It wasn't the first time this happened, and it wouldn't be the last. I set my phone down, stomach hollow, and glanced over at Dorian. He was seated at the far end of the couch, flipping through emails on his iPad, as if my presence barely registered. I wanted to believe the distance was just stress. He always said litigation work drained him, but lately, it felt like I was the furniture in our home. Useful. Silent. Unseen. A few days later, Callista threw a little pre-birthday gathering at her house. She insisted it was just casual, but of course her dining room looked like it had been styled for a magazine shoot. Strings of warm fairy lights draped across the windows, and candles flickered at every corner like tiny beacons of curated perfection. I stood near the wine cart, swirling my glass, watching the room move around me. Dorian stood near Callista, laughing. Laughing the kind of laugh I hadn't heard in months, unfiltered, head slightly back, teeth visible. She leaned in, saying something low, and he rested his hand lightly on her shoulder. They looked good together, I won't lie. Both of them had that polished, effortless charm that drew attention like magnets. I wasn't jealous of how they looked. I was choking on how invisible I felt. At one point, Dorian passed her the bottle of Pinot Noir, and their fingers brushed. It was a moment barely noticeable. But not to me. There was a pause half a second too long, and a smirk that followed. She looked over at me, caught me watching, and didn't flinch. Just kept pouring her wine. Back at home that night, I waited until Dorian was in bed. He'd fallen asleep fast, like always. I lay next to him in the dark, staring at the ceiling. He hadn't said a word on the ride home. Neither did I. My phone buzzed again, group chat. "So fun tonight. Red heart. Best family ever." Callista dropped a selfie of the group, everyone smiling in her kitchen. I wasn't in the photo. I had been there, but somehow I was cropped out. I scrolled back through the chat history. Weeks worth of conversations. I began to notice the pattern, not just in that thread, but in every holiday, every decision, every moment. Callista always got the last word. The praise. The thanks. The spotlight. And I was the quiet one. The easy one. The dependable one. Which, in our family, translated to the forgettable one. The next morning, I waited until Dorian went into shower before reaching for his phone. He never put a passcode on it. He didn't need to. I had never given him a reason to think I'd snoop. I opened his messages. Most were boring work threads, updates from his office. Then one caught my eye. It was from Callista. "You made me laugh tonight. Again." I needed that. Kiss mark. My stomach knotted, so tight I thought I'd throw up. I stared at the message, thumb hovering over it, afraid to tap and see the full conversation. My ears rang with static. I couldn't even hear the water running anymore. Dorian's voice echoed from the shower, humming some old R&B song. The same tune he used to sing when he made breakfast for me on Saturdays. Back when I felt chosen. Back when I still mattered. I set the phone down carefully. Not because I was afraid of being caught, but because something in me had shifted. I wasn't the same woman who curled up in that armchair days ago, hoping someone would notice her in a group chat. That night, as I lay in bed beside the man who once promised me forever, I realized something simple and cruel. Nothing felt like home anymore. The message from Callista haunted me for the next 48 hours. It followed me through work, through quiet drives home, even in the grocery store when I reached for a jar of pasta sauce. I'd see her name flash behind my eyelids every time I blinked. I wanted to tell myself it was harmless, that she was being playful, that Dorian was just being polite. But deep down, something sharp had already lodged itself under my skin. By the second evening, I couldn't stand the silence anymore. The house looked perfect, as if I was trying to prove something to no one in particular. Candles flickered on the table. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air. Rosemary, garlic, butter, all his favorites. I poured 2 glasses of wine and checked the clock. 6:20. He called just as I set the plates down. His tone was clipped. "Running late," he said. "Don't wait up." "Are you okay?" I asked. "You sound tense." "Just a long day. I'll be home soon." Click. I stood there for a moment, listening to the empty static that followed after the call ended. I tried to convince myself it was fine, that maybe traffic was bad, that maybe he really was tired. But something in his voice, it wasn't fatigue. It was distance. When Dorian finally walked through the door, it was nearly 7. He didn't look at the candles or the meal. He tossed his jacket onto the chair and poured himself a drink without a word. His tie hung loose around his neck, and he smelled faintly of expensive cologne, one he hadn't worn in months. I tried to sound casual. "You didn't mention Callista was at your office today." His eyes flicked to me. "What are you talking about?" "She texted," I said carefully. "Said she dropped something off for you." He sighed, the kind of sigh that says he's already bored of this conversation. "She stopped by to ask about insurance paperwork for Mom." Why does that sound like an interrogation? I'm not interrogating. I forced a small laugh. I just thought it was. He cut me off. "Verity, you're reading into things again." I set my napkin down. "Dorian, I saw the message." He paused mid-sip. "What message?" "The one that said, 'You made me laugh tonight.'" Again. The air between us turned dense. His shoulders stiffened, and when he finally looked up, his eyes were cold, too calm. "You went through my phone?" I swallowed, steadying my voice. "No." It was open. I just saw it. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Unbelievable. You always do this, you know that? You create problems out of thin air." "I'm not creating anything." My voice trembled despite my effort to keep it even. "You know how that message looks." He placed his glass down with a sharp clink. "You're paranoid. Callista's been nothing but kind to you." "Kind?" I almost laughed. "She's been calling you late at night. You think I don't notice?" That's when he said it. Calm. Precise. Like he was delivering a verdict. "I'm tired of your miserable face. Your sister knows how to make a man happy." For a second, the room stopped breathing. The sound of the refrigerator humming in the corner felt deafening. I couldn't even blink. "What did you just say?" He leaned back, unbothered, swirling the wine in his glass. "You heard me. Maybe if you smiled once in a while, we wouldn't be here." My heart felt like it had fallen out of my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, the words replaying in a loop in my head until they stopped sounding like English. Finally, I managed, "I see." That was all I could say. Not because I forgave him, but because there was nothing left to defend. He scoffed. "Don't be dramatic, Verity. You twist everything." I turned away from him, walked into the kitchen, and picked up the serving plate. My hand trembled, slick with sweat. The plate slipped from my grasp, hit the floor, and shattered into pieces. The sound echoed through the house, sharp and final. I stared at the shards on the tile, white porcelain glinting under the soft light. My reflection broke apart in them, fragmented and distorted. Dorian didn't move. Clean it up before someone steps on it. His voice was flat, detached, like he was commenting on the weather. I knelt down, slowly gathering the pieces one by one. The edge of one shard nicked my finger, a thin line of red blooming across my skin. The sting was faint compared to the one in my chest. After that, we didn't speak. He ate a few bites of chicken, scrolled through his phone, and left his plate half full. By the time I finished cleaning the kitchen, he was upstairs, snoring. I walked to the bathroom and turned on the light. The harsh brightness made me flinch. I stared into the mirror. My face looked calm, almost indifferent. But my eyes, they weren't the same ones I'd seen 2 days ago. I whispered his words aloud, as if saying them might dull their edge. Your sister knows how to make a man happy. The woman in the mirror didn't cry. She didn't crumble. She just stared back at me, silent and unrecognizable. I turned off the light and stood in the darkness for a moment, listening to the steady rhythm of the rain against the window. Something inside me had gone still, so still it scared me. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the shadows stretch across the ceiling, realizing that the quiet I used to find comforting now felt like a warning. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what would come next. By the time the sun began its slow rise, I was still awake, curled on my side in the guest room with my knees pulled tight toward my chest. The silence of that space, the room that used to host visitors and now held the echo of my own exile, was thick with memory. I could hear Dorian downstairs, the distant clink of a mug on the counter, the rhythmic shuffle of socked feet against hardwood. He didn't come up, didn't knock, didn't ask if I was okay. And I didn't expect him to. Lying there, wrapped in the same old fleece blanket we got from his mother one Christmas, I found my thoughts drifting in ways I hadn't let them in years. Not just to what had happened, but to the things that had always been there, the things I had ignored, forgiven, blurred out of focus to keep the peace. It wasn't just what Dorian said to me. It was that I believed it could have come from anyone in my family. I was 10 the first time I realized Callista was the star. Our school was hosting a winter recital, and I'd practiced for weeks. 2 songs on the piano, played from memory. I had dressed up in a velvet navy dress with a lace collar that Mom said made me look less serious. I took my seat on the hard bench, my legs barely reaching the pedals. I played every note perfectly. No missed keys. No hesitation. But when I stood and bowed, the room was polite. A few claps. One man coughed into his sleeve. Then Callista stepped onto the stage. She was only a year older, but already had the presence of someone born to be adored. She sang Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and by the time she hit the high note, half the parents in the audience were wiping their eyes. The applause she received could have cracked glass. My own mother stood to clap, tears in her eyes. And when she leaned down to whisper in my ear, she said, "Your sister was born for the stage. You're more of a background girl. But that's okay. Every star needs a steady sky." I didn't cry that night. I smiled and nodded, but something small inside me curled up and folded into itself. That feeling never left. Years later, the pattern stayed the same. At birthdays, I was the one organizing cake orders and tablecloths, while Callista arrived late with a dramatic entrance and a bottle of wine, greeted like royalty. At our cousin Leah's wedding, I spent 2 days helping the bride with errands. On the day of the ceremony, someone asked me if I was the wedding planner. Callista was a bridesmaid. Her speech made the room laugh and cry. No one mentioned my name. And just a few weeks ago, during Thanksgiving dinner, the tradition continued. The Sloan household was full that year. Mom's new husband joined us, along with cousins from out of state and neighbors who had nowhere else to go. The dining table was stretched with leaf extensions and covered in an autumn-themed runner that Verity me had picked out and ironed. As the last guests arrived, I found my name tag at the end of the table, shoved next to the trash bin and the utility closet door. Could you scoot down? Callista had said, gently placing her youngest next to the seat I had just pulled out. So, the kids can sit near Grandma? I smiled. Of course. No one looked at me twice. No one noticed I barely touched my food. I spent most of the evening passing dishes, refilling glasses, and smiling through a mouth that wanted to disappear. I wasn't angry. Not then. I was used to it. That morning, as I lay staring at the wall, all of those moments finally stacked together. Layer after layer of being forgotten, diminished, set aside. And in that quiet realization, I understood something I hadn't let myself admit. They had trained me for this. To be the second choice. The backup plan. The extra chair. The woman who made sure things ran smoothly, while someone else took the credit. Dorian didn't invent my invisibility. He just fit right into it. When I married him, everyone said, "He's so lucky to have you. You're low maintenance." Solid. It was always said as a compliment, but it landed like a lid closing over my light. Now I saw it for what it was. I wasn't easy. I was erased. The pain wasn't in being betrayed. It was realizing how long I'd allowed myself to be ignored. I sat up slowly, the guest room still dim. My feet touched the floor like they were remembering how to hold weight again. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't slam any doors. But I walked to the door of the master bedroom and looked at it like it was a stranger's house. The bed behind it held a man who said the most unforgivable thing I'd ever heard. Not just because of the words, but because of how comfortable he was saying them. I stood there, my hand hovering near the doorknob, then let it fall. I turned and walked back into the hallway, into the guest room that had become mine by default. Before I lay back down, I looked at myself in the mirror on the far wall. My hair was flat, my eyes swollen, but something in my face had changed. I didn't say it loud, but I said it. No more background girl. I didn't need the morning light to remind me of what I already knew. The guest room felt colder somehow, like the walls themselves had grown tired of holding in my silence. I wrapped the throw blanket tighter around my shoulders and stepped into the hallway barefoot, my skin bracing against the chill of the wood floor. Dorian's car was already gone. No note. No text. No sound of the front door closing behind him. He must have left while I was still pretending to sleep, back turned to the world. That was fine. I wasn't in the mood to perform either. I made a pot of coffee. Not for him, for me. Strong, black, no sugar. The kitchen still smelled faintly of rosemary from the meal he didn't bother to acknowledge the night before. I poured myself a cup, leaned against the counter, and stared out the window. The backyard trees were losing their last leaves, dropping them like confessions. When the coffee had cooled and my pulse had returned to something resembling normal, I walked into the home office, a room we once argued about converting into a nursery. The space was neat, not because it was used often, but because it was ignored. Bills were stacked by month in labeled folders. Printer paper was still in its original plastic wrap. Dorian had never touched any of it. I sat down and opened my email. Half a dozen unread messages stared back at me. Teacher updates, PDA reminders, sale alerts from stores I hadn't visited in a year. I clicked through them numbly until I noticed a folder labeled Security System. It had been months since I checked it, maybe a year. We had set it up mostly because Dorian insisted. It made our house look smarter, he said, like having cameras and door sensors gave us some badge of suburban sophistication. I clicked on the link, logged in with a password I hadn't used in forever, his mother's birthday, of course. The interface loaded. Rows of archived footage lined the screen, all neatly time-stamped. I clicked on one at random, a delivery guy dropping off a package. Boring. Then another, me watering the front garden. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe I just needed to see something that felt true, tangible. But as I clicked through more clips, one caught my eye. Thursday afternoon. 3 weeks ago. I'd been at the grocery store that day, I remembered, because Dorian had texted me asking if we still had almond milk. In the video, the front door opened. Callista stepped inside. She had a key. I'd forgotten that, or maybe I never knew she had one. She looked around, hair freshly done, nails like small polished weapons. She didn't call out, didn't seem hesitant. She walked straight into the living room like she belonged there. Moments later, Dorian walked in from the hallway. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, tie loose. He smiled when he saw her. And then, she hugged him. Not a polite, sister-in-law kind of hug. A full-bodied embrace, her head resting on his chest, his hands settling just a little too naturally on her waist. They didn't kiss, but they didn't need to. The way she smiled up at him, the way he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, it was more intimate than anything he'd offered me in months. I watched it again, and again. At some point, my coffee had gone cold. My hand was still wrapped around the mug, but I hadn't moved. The room around me felt like it was shifting, like I was no longer sitting but floating above my own life, watching it unravel in pixels and silence. The screen kept looping the clip, but I didn't blink. This wasn't a maybe. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't my imagination spinning shadows. It was real. I didn't cry. There were no sobs, no broken plates, no yelling into pillows. I just stared until my eyes ached. Eventually, I stood up and reached into the bottom drawer of the desk. Pulled out an old USB drive, one Dorian had used to store tax documents years ago. I formatted it, cleared everything. I downloaded the clip, encrypted it. Then I opened my email. To myself. Subject: in case they lie. CC: Magda Severin. Magda wasn't just a friend. She was a lawyer, one of the sharpest women I'd ever known. We met through a school board mediation 3 years back. She was the kind of woman who knew how to talk like thunder without ever raising her voice. I didn't explain anything in the message. Just attached the clip and hit send. When it was done, I renamed the video on my desktop. Opening move. Because I wasn't screaming anymore. I wasn't begging to be seen. I was watching. And I was done playing the background girl. Sunday came with a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in a long time. Not peace, just the eerie calm that settles in right before a tornado touches down. I had spent the earlier part of the day cleaning out the living room, rearranging furniture I hadn't touched in months, as if preparing a stage. The air in the house felt tighter than usual, thick with the weight of what was coming. By 5:30 that evening, the dining table was set. Not just set, curated. Every plate, every napkin folded the way my mother used to teach us when we were little. Candles flickered in silver holders, and the roast sat in the oven just long enough to brown perfectly without drying out. I had poured a bottle of wine, Cabernet, Callista's favorite, and chilled sparkling water for my mother. I'd sent the invitations 3 days earlier. Let's have dinner. Just us. It's time. I kept it vague. I wanted them all to think this was a peace offering, a soft attempt at keeping the family intact. Henrietta was the first to arrive, dressed in one of her floral blouses, the kind with pearl buttons and shoulder pads. She hugged me briefly, too briefly, and immediately looked around the room like a critic evaluating a museum display. "This is lovely," she said. "You've outdone yourself. Reminds me of your sister's engagement party." Dorian and Callista walked in together 15 minutes later. That didn't surprise me. He didn't even try to pretend they'd come separately. Callista wore red, bold and clingy. Her lips matched the dress. Her hair was curled like she was preparing for a magazine shoot rather than a casual family dinner. Dorian, of course, played it cool, button-down shirt untucked just enough to suggest ease, cologne still fresh. Dinner started as awkward as I expected. Conversation hovered around neutral topics: Henrietta's new lawn guy, Dorian's office renovations, Callista's client, who was a total nightmare. I smiled when appropriate. Passed dishes. Chewed slowly. The tension sat just below the surface, pulsing like a slow leak in a tire. Every time I looked at Dorian, he looked past me. Every time I caught Callista's eye, she offered a smile a little too wide. Finally, after dessert, lemon tart, another Callista favorite, I stood. "Before we wrap this up," I said, "I want to show you all something. Just a quick memory. From this house." Henrietta tilted her head. "Is this about the video from Christmas?" I didn't answer. I walked over to the TV and plugged in my laptop. The file was already queued. No introduction. No warning. I hit play. The screen lit up with grainy security footage. Callista entering our house. Callista embracing my husband. His hands on her waist. Her face tilted toward him. It played for less than 30 seconds. But that was enough. Dorian froze. His face drained of color. Callista gasped, stood halfway out of her seat. Verity, that's not what it looks like. Henrietta's fork clinked against her plate. Verity, this isn't necessary. Family always. I cut her off, still standing, still calm. Family doesn't hide knives and hugs. Callista stepped forward. He was comforting me. You're twisting things. I met her eyes. I didn't say anything, Callista. The video did. Dorian cleared his throat, his voice low and dry. You're overreacting. This is a distraction. You're trying to make something out of nothing. I turned to him, slowly. We'll deal with ours separately. Then I looked at my mother, who sat with her lips pressed together like she'd just tasted something sour. Do you remember when Dad passed, and he left that plot of land in his will? I asked her, voice steady. She nodded once. Yes. He left it to you and Callista jointly. He left it to me. I corrected. And I signed it over to Callista because you said she needed the money more. Because you said I didn't care about those things. Henrietta flinched. You said you didn't want the headache. I didn't want the war, I replied. But now I've changed my mind. I want my share. All of it. The land, the deed, everything I gave up out of guilt. It's mine. Blood is mine. Callista's voice rose. You're doing this now? Over a hug? Over a pattern, I said. Over years of being pushed aside while you smiled your way into everything that belonged to me. The silence that followed was the kind that wraps around a room like a noose. Dorian opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand. No, I said. Not tonight. I returned to the table, picked up my wine glass, and lifted it gently. To truth, I said. She's rude, but never late. I sipped. Callista stood frozen. Dorian stared at his plate. Henrietta blinked too much, but said nothing. And for the first time in a long while, I felt full. Not from the food. From finally reclaiming space in a room I was told to shrink in. Morning light poured through the kitchen blinds like thin, sharp blades. I had slept little, my body still tense from the night before, but there was a steadiness inside me I hadn't felt in years. The decision had already been made. It was only a matter of letting the words leave my mouth. I heard Dorian before I saw him, the shuffle of his bare feet on the wood floor, the faint sigh as he opened the refrigerator door. When he walked into the kitchen, his shirt was wrinkled, his tie hanging loose around his neck. He looked tired, disheveled, but not ashamed. He cleared his throat. About last night you overreacted. I didn't look at him. I was rinsing my coffee mug, my back to him. He went on. Callista and I, it's not what you think. She came to me because she's worried about Mom. We were just talking and I turned around, cutting him off. I don't need an explanation. He frowned. Then what do you want? I walked to the kitchen drawer, pulled out a manila envelope, and placed it on the counter between us. You won't need to lie anymore, I said softly. Just sign these. He blinked, confused. What is this? Divorce papers. The words hung there like a door slamming shut. He took a step back. You can't be serious. I am. He let out a hollow laugh. You're being impulsive. We can work through this. I shook my head. I've been doing that alone for 3 years, Dorian. I'm done talking myself into staying. He leaned forward, voice low. You're really going to throw away everything we built? We didn't build anything, I said. I did. You just lived in it. He opened his mouth again, but couldn't seem to find the right words. The silence stretched long and heavy. Finally, he muttered something about calling his lawyer and stormed out. When the sound of the front door closing faded, I stood still for a long time. The house felt bigger, almost too big for one person, but I breathed easier than I had in years. That afternoon, I decided to tell my mother. Henrietta's house was the same as always, neat, floral, trapped in another decade. She answered the door wearing her gardening gloves, soil still under her nails. "Well, this is a surprise," she said. "Come in." We sat at the kitchen table, the same one I'd grown up eating at, its surface polished, so often it shined like glass. I told her straight out, without hesitation, "I'm filing for divorce." Her hands froze midair. "Verity, think carefully," she said. "Marriage isn't disposable." "It's already gone, Mother." Her eyes narrowed. "You're really going to let your sister ruin your marriage? You think this is how women survive?" "She didn't ruin it," I said quietly. "He did." She scoffed. "A good wife doesn't give up. A woman keeps her house by keeping her mouth shut." I smiled then, not out of humor, but out of understanding. "No, Mother. A woman keeps her house by knowing when to stop sweeping dirt under the rug." For the first time, she looked unsettled. I stood, thanked her for the tea I hadn't touched, and walked out. The autumn air was crisp, sharp, cleansing. The next morning, I drove to the courthouse. The hallways smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant, and the low murmur of voices echoed off the marble floors. Magda Severin met me outside the clerk's office. Her gray suit was immaculate, her hair pulled back tightly, and her expression softened only slightly when she saw me. "You ready?" she asked. "I've been ready." She handed me a pen. "Then let's get you free." It took less than 15 minutes to sign the documents that untied a decade of my life. 10 years summarized in a few signatures and a stamp seal. When it was done, Magda squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing." "I know," I said, "but it doesn't feel like victory." "It's not supposed to," she replied. "It's supposed to feel clean." Outside, the sunlight hit my face as I stepped onto the courthouse steps. For the first time in a long time, I felt air fill my lungs without pressure. The world didn't look different, but I did. That night, Dorian came by. I'd expected it. The sound of his car pulling into the driveway didn't startle me. He didn't knock, just opened the door like he still had the right to. He stood in the living room, holding the envelope I'd given him. "I looked over the papers," he said. "You really went through with it." I nodded. "I told you I would." He rubbed his forehead, pacing. "You don't have to do this, V. We can fix it. We've been through worse." I stared at him for a moment, then shook my head. "No, we haven't. This was the worst. And you made sure of it." He took a breath. "I made a mistake." "You made a choice," I corrected. He looked at me then, eyes softening with something that might have been regret. "You really don't love me anymore?" "I stopped loving the man you became," I said. "I'm just learning to stop pitying the woman I was." He dropped his gaze. "You think walking away makes you stronger?" "It doesn't make me strong," I said. "It makes me sane." He laughed, short and bitter. "You'll regret this." "I doubt it," I said. "You thought you broke my heart. You only cleared my path." He left without another word. When the door clicked shut, I didn't feel the urge to cry. I just sat on the couch, listening to the ticking clock on the wall. Each sound marked the distance growing between who I'd been and who I was becoming. For the first time, I didn't feel small in my own house. The next few days passed in quiet sequence. Coffee in the morning, emails, errands, small talk with neighbors who didn't know my name. But the silence in my mind had a sharp edge, and it followed me everywhere. I didn't miss Dorian, not really. I didn't even think much about Callista. What I kept circling back to, what I couldn't shake, was her. My mother. Henrietta Sloane. The one person who had seen the cracks forming long before anyone else. The one who should have pulled me aside, looked me in the eye, and said, "Something isn't right." But she never had. It had been a week since I'd signed the divorce papers. That afternoon, I stood outside her front door, holding nothing in my hands, unsure what I expected to carry out. I didn't call ahead. I didn't plan a speech. I just drove to her house, parked at the curb, and walked up the same steps I'd run across as a girl. The porch, still creaked. The same wind chimes still hung from the awning, their sound soft and hollow in the wind. I knocked. She opened the door with her usual controlled warmth. Surprise flickered in her eyes for a moment. "Verity, can I come in?" "Of course," she said, stepping aside. The kitchen hadn't changed. Floral curtains, neat countertops, a bowl of fake fruit in the center of the table. Framed pictures lined the wall. Every single one of them featured Callista. Weddings, birthdays, her children. My face appeared in only one, off to the side, blurry. I sat down at the table. She joined me across from it, folding her hands like we were in church. I got right to it. "I know you knew." Her eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You do," I said. "You've known for a while. Maybe not the specifics, but you knew something was happening between Callista and Dorian. And you said nothing." She looked down, fussed with the edge of a napkin. "Verity, don't twist this. I didn't want to get involved in something that wasn't mine to fix." "You weren't protecting yourself, Mother. You were protecting her." She leaned back slightly, defensive. Callista needed help. She was struggling after the separation. I leaned in. "I heard the phone call. 3 weeks before everything came out. You told her to make sure the deed to Dad's land went fully in her name. You told her I wouldn't fight it if it came from her." She blinked. "You were eavesdropping?" "No," I said. "I was in the hallway, waiting to speak to you. But I heard enough." Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked smaller suddenly, like the walls of her confidence had started crumbling. "I was trying to keep peace," she said at last. "You always misunderstood Callista. She didn't mean to hurt you." I sat back in my chair. "You let your favorite daughter steal my husband, and your silence was the knife. You didn't fail to protect me. You chose not to." Her chin quivered. She didn't deny it. "I didn't want to lose either of you," she whispered. "But you were fine with me losing everything," I said. The tears finally came. Not loud sobs, not dramatic. Just quiet weeping, like a woman realizing her kingdom was built on sand. I didn't rush to comfort her. For once, I let the silence settle on her shoulders instead of mine. She reached across the table, her hand trembling slightly. "Verity, don't leave like this. Don't leave angry." I stood, slowly, deliberately. I looked around the kitchen once more, at the pictures, the perfect dishes, the curated life where I had always been the ghost. "I'm not angry, Mother," I said, meeting her eyes one last time. "I'm done." And I meant it. I walked to the front door without looking back. The floorboards creaked behind me, but she didn't follow. When I stepped outside, the air was cooler, the sun already beginning to dip behind the trees. I got in the car, turned the key, and drove. No music, no noise, just the soft rhythm of the tires against pavement and the sound of something heavy lifting off my chest. It had been 6 months since I'd last seen either of them, Dorian or Callista. Half a year since the unraveling, since the world I thought I knew folded in on itself, quiet as snowfall and just as cold. But life, as it always does, found its way forward, slow and steady. Like water carving stone, it reshaped me in small, invisible ways until I barely resembled the woman I had been. The silence in my apartment no longer gnawed at me. I found comfort in it now, in the stillness that had once screamed of absence. I stopped turning the TV on just for background noise. I started cooking simple meals for one. I even began walking without a destination, just letting the air touch my skin, feeling my breath in the morning chill, watching the world without needing to engage with it. There's a certain sanctity to silence, especially after years of emotional static. It had become my church, and I worshipped there daily. That Thursday morning, I headed downtown to take care of some long overdue errands. There were no dramatic plans, no revenge, no confrontation. Just a list written in ink on the back of a receipt. Update voter registration. Finalize name change paperwork. Nothing big. At least, nothing that would make headlines. But to me, it felt like a final exhale after holding my breath for far too long. I was ready to leave Blackwell behind. Ready to stop carrying a name that had become more burden than badge. The parking lot near the courthouse was half full, and the meter barely worked. I shoved in quarters and made my way across the street to the government building, its beige stone exterior as uninspiring as the last time I'd been there. Inside, it was exactly how I remembered it, humming with fluorescent lights, every surface tinged gray or tan, and that odd smell of aged paper and overused carpet. A tired woman at the front desk handed me a number. I found a spot in the row of molded plastic chairs, sat down, and folded my hands in my lap. Around me, the air felt thick with monotony. A child fussed quietly in a stroller nearby. Somewhere, a printer jammed and was promptly cursed at. Then, behind me, laughter. Low, clipped, nervous. I knew that sound. There was a shuffle of feet, a throat being cleared, a specific sort of clearing, almost performative, like someone trying to announce their presence without seeming desperate to be noticed. I didn't turn around immediately. I didn't need to. The past has a voice, and mine had too. I would have known them anywhere. Callista spoke next. Her voice, once like honey on polished silver, was now flat, frayed at the edges. She sounded tired in a way that wealth once protected her from. It was a tone shaped by disappointment and sleepless nights. I turned, and there they were. Dorian stood awkwardly in an outdated charcoal suit, its shoulders slightly rumpled, collar slightly stained. He looked like a man who used to matter, before the layoffs, before the fallout, before the mask cracked and no one bought the illusion anymore. Callista, once the picture of curated femininity, had mascara smudged under her eyes and chapped lips that tugged nervously at the edge of a paper cup. Her hair, once a signature feature, was pulled back with a plastic drugstore clip, the kind sold in packs of 3. She clutched a thin envelope like it held her whole life inside. Dorian had a clipboard in his hand. Above them, a sign hung in bold black type. Unemployment Services. Please have your ID ready. My stomach didn't twist. My heart didn't race. There was no cinematic swell of emotion. Just stillness. The kind that follows a verdict you knew was coming. Callista saw me first. Her eyes widened like a deer caught in headlights. Guilt, panic, something between. She whispered something to Dorian and quickly stepped behind a nearby pillar, as if the structure could erase her from view. Dorian didn't move. He stood his ground and met my gaze, unblinking. Verity, he said, his voice hoarse, thin with something that might have been guilt or exhaustion. Maybe both. I stood before he could say anything else. I didn't come here for a reckoning. I didn't need a confession or an apology. That ship had sunk long ago. I don't hate you, I said quietly. I don't even care about you anymore. Dorian's mouth parted slightly. Behind him, Callista peeked out, half hiding like a ghost unsure of her haunting rights. I just came here to change my name, I continued. Looks like you came to change your story.
And that was it.
I turned away before either of them could speak. My steps felt calm, purposeful. No flair, no dramatic exit, just movement forward. I passed the row of chairs again, past a security guard who didn't glance up from his phone. At the front desk, my number was called. I handed over my paperwork and ID to a woman with red glasses and a bored expression. She didn't ask about my past, didn't care why I wanted to leave my last name behind. She just verified the forms, clicked through a screen, and passed me a pen. I signed the line with a name I hadn't used in over a decade. Verity Sloan. My name. My father's name. The one I let go of for love. Or what I thought was love. Something pure. Something untainted. Not a name borrowed for convenience. Not a name traded like currency in someone else's kingdom. Not a name I'd regret every time I had to explain it.
Mine.
Again. When I stepped outside, the sun had finally broken through the dense October clouds. The light was soft but steady, casting long golden beams across the courthouse steps. It felt warmer than I expected, like spring in the heart of fall, like a second chance dressed as a late season. I stood still for a moment, letting it wash over me. The wind lifted a strand of hair and carried it across my face. I inhaled deeply, slowly, like someone learning how to breathe again. And then, softly, barely audible even to myself, I said, "It's not revenge if you never wanted them to lose. You just wanted yourself to win." That's what it had always been about. Not vengeance. Not vindication. Victory. And, in that moment, I knew. I had already won. When I moved into the new apartment, I didn't bring much. Just the essentials. A few battered boxes of clothes, my favorite mugs wrapped in dish towels, the French press I couldn't imagine mornings without, and a small collection of framed photographs, mostly of my father and me, smiling beside trout and catfish we caught together on the shores of Lake Barkley when I was still young enough to believe nothing could ever really break. Everything else, the matching set of wedding china we barely used, the heavy furniture picked to impress guests who never stayed long, the curated mantle photos that had started to feel like museum exhibits of a life I no longer lived, I left behind. Some went to donation centers. Some, I simply left in the old house, for the next tenant to decide what was worth keeping. The apartment was nothing special by most people's standards. One bedroom, slanted hardwood floors that creaked like an old rocking chair, and a narrow galley kitchen with chipped tile and mismatched cabinet knobs. The bathroom window stuck when it rained, and the radiator sounded like it was coughing through winter. But to me, it was perfect. It was clean. It was quiet. It was mine. The first couple of weeks were the hardest, not because I was lonely, but because I had to get used to the new kind of silence. Not the stifling silence I had known in my last home, where every unspoken word hung in the air like smoke. This was different. This silence was soft, spacious, the kind that made room for thoughts, for breath, for rediscovery. I started to like it. I began buying fresh flowers at the corner market, not for anyone else, not for display, but just because I liked seeing them on the kitchen windowsill when the morning sun rolled in. Daffodils, white tulips, peonies, when I felt indulgent. I cooked again, not out of obligation or performance, but because I wanted to. I read until I fell asleep with the book in my lap. I began writing again, early in the morning when everything was still and the world hadn't yet found its voice. And then, one afternoon in early spring, with the windows cracked open just enough to let in the scent of magnolia and thawing soil, I opened the last box. I'd avoided it for months. Labeled in my handwriting, "Miscellaneous. Don't open yet." I wasn't even sure why I had packed it. Maybe because I couldn't quite bring myself to let go of everything. Maybe because some part of me believed there was something inside that still had a purpose. I lifted the flaps carefully, almost reverently, and started sifting through the contents. A couple of mismatched candles, a snow globe from a forgotten trip, a few old birthday cards. There was a church bulletin tucked near the bottom, faded to a soft ivory color, and then a velvet jewelry box.
Small. Square.
Midnight blue. It wasn't familiar. I opened it. Inside, tucked neatly, was an envelope. My name written across the front in handwriting that sent a jolt through my chest. Crooked, looping letters that I hadn't seen in years, but would recognize anywhere.
Dad.
My breath caught. The date in the top right corner was inked in small numbers, exactly 1 week before he passed. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. My Verity, I don't know when you'll find this. Maybe soon. Maybe never. I'm not even sure you'll recognize the me who wrote it. But I'm writing it anyway because there are things I never said enough, and I fear the world may never say them to you either. You've always been my quiet fire. People mistake silence for weakness. They think strength is loud and attention-grabbing. But I know better. I watched you carry things heavier than your years. I saw you hold broken pieces together so others wouldn't even realize they were falling apart. You gave your energy to building things you were rarely credited for. That's not invisible. That's powerful. You're the kind of strong that doesn't ask for applause. The kind that bends without breaking. The kind the world desperately needs, even if it doesn't know it yet. You'll be called too soft. You'll be overlooked in rooms that should celebrate you. Some people will mistake your humility for for insignificance. But please remember this. Just because someone can't see the flame doesn't mean you aren't burning. You don't need permission to exist loudly. You don't need validation to be whole. Don't let anyone, no lover, no sibling, no mother, draw you in chalk outlines. You were meant for stone. You are carved with intention.
You're not temporary.
And if you're reading this, it means you've walked through something hard. Maybe something I'll never know. But I hope you let yourself feel proud. I hope you know I'm proud. Always.
Love. Dad.
I didn't realize I was crying until a warm tear dropped onto the paper, blurring the bottom of his signature. Not sobbing. Not even sniffling. Just a steady, soft release, like a dam gently lifting its gate after years of pressure. These weren't tears of grief. They were tears of truth. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, the letter still in my lap, breathing in the silence that no longer scared me. And I let the sound of his voice fill the space between the walls, the voice I thought I'd lost, the one that lived not in recordings or home videos, but in words written just for me. That night, I framed the letter and placed it on my desk, right next to the window where the light came through best in the mornings. I started doing more with my days. Volunteering twice a week at a women's shelter on 3rd Street, helping with intake forms, handing out supplies, sitting with women who just needed someone to talk to. I didn't have degrees or certificates. I didn't have all the answers. But I knew what it felt like to be silent and underestimated. And I knew what it looked like to survive it.
I wrote again.
Not just journal entries. I wrote essays, observations, little vignettes of life that might one day find their way into the hands of someone who needed to know they weren't alone. I smiled more. I laughed easier. I walked through the world like someone no longer waiting for permission to belong in it. I didn't call Callista. I didn't visit my mother. I didn't forgive them, not out of bitterness, but because I no longer needed their peace to secure my own. That door didn't close with a bang. It closed with the soft turn of a lock that I controlled. And it stayed closed, not as punishment, but as protection. Some families don't end with fire. Some simply fade quietly. And that, too, is closure. That night, standing by the open window, the scent of blooming magnolia drifting in with the breeze, I whispered something I hadn't said aloud in years. My name is Verity. I am not broken. I am not background. I am not replaceable. I am whole. Sometimes the people who should have protected us are the very ones who cause the deepest wounds. Verity's story isn't just about betrayal. It's about choosing yourself when no one else will. So let me ask you, have you ever forgiven someone just to keep the peace, only to lose your own? If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what part resonated with you the most. Don't forget to like,